ABC News. What actually happened? The core story so far. 1. Trump revived a plan to acquire Greenland. Trump reiterated that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security, framing control of the island as vital to U.S. and global defense against Russia and China. Earlier in January, Trump threatened to impose tariffs on European NATO allies that rejected U.S. demands. Number 2. World leaders exploded. European, Danish, and Greenlandic pushback. Denmark, Greenland, and major EU states called Trump's rhetoric unacceptable and reaffirmed that Greenland is not for sale. Large anti-Trump protests erupted across Greenland and Denmark under the slogan, "Greenland is not for sale." Even some European populist leaders, who often once echoed Trump, broke with him on this issue as violating sovereignty norms. 3. Trump claims a framework for a deal. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump announced a vague framework, agreement on Greenland, dropped tariff threats, said cooperation on Arctic security would be enhanced, and asserted the U.S. would have total access. But Greenland and Danish leaders denied that any agreed deal exists, saying sovereignty and real negotiations still haven't happened. 4. NATO and allies nervously stepping in. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met Trump and appears to have moderated the situation by emphasizing security cooperation instead of territorial acquisition. NATO and EU leaders are coordinating responses and pushing back diplomatically. Key fallout and global impact. Transatlantic relations strained. Trump's rhetoric damaged trust with EU members, raising the worst tensions in decades between the U.S. and longtime allies. European Parliament suspended progress on key trade agreements in reaction to Trump's threats. Impact on NATO cohesion. Allies fear U.S. unpredictability could undermine the alliance's unity. Threatening tariffs over an ally's sovereign territory is unprecedented. NATO may pivot more toward joint Arctic security planning without acknowledging U.S. sovereignty claims. Russia watches closely. Russia sees the Arctic, including Greenland, as strategically crucial and has condemned the controversy, while also subtly celebrating U.S.-Europe discord. Historical context. A fractured NATO could embolden Russia in Eastern Europe, the Arctic, and near Baltic states. China's strategic interest. China is investing heavily in Arctic shipping routes and rare earth access. A Western alliance splinter would give it geopolitical openings in the region. Economics and markets. Markets initially boosted by Trump's promise of a framework deal, but threats of tariffs and transatlantic conflict carry risk for global trade, especially in services and tech sectors. Technology and security. Greenland's location makes it key for missile defense, early warning systems, space surveillance, and Arctic fiber optic infrastructure, all tech and defense vectors that global powers covet. Timeline predictions. Below are forecast scenarios at multiple intervals, from likely outcomes to worst-case trajectories. 1 month out, most likely, continued diplomatic negotiations between U.S., Denmark, Greenland, and NATO. NATO focuses on Arctic defense cooperation rather than territorial control. European leaders issue coordinated statements reaffirming sovereignty and alliance norms. Moderate risk. Continued public protests within Greenland and Denmark. Some European parliaments begin symbolic or procedural opposition to U.S. initiatives. Tariffs remain shelved, but could be threatened again depending on political dynamics. Worst case, breakdown in U.S.-EU economic talks. Minor economic market turmoil fueled by confidence shocks and renewed tariff threats. 6 months out, most likely, a formal Arctic security agreement emerges that increases NATO presence in Greenland while recognizing Danish sovereignty. Denmark and Greenland secure commitments for Arctic development funding from U.S. and EU. Moderate risk. Political fractures in NATO over how to manage Russia-China Arctic interests. Greenland independence momentum rises among local politicians, potentially setting a referendum. Worst case, trade retaliation begins between EU and US in select sectors: tech, agriculture, energy. Open diplomatic chill, summit cancellations, reciprocal travel trade restrictions. 1 year out, most likely, Arctic defense coordination becomes a key NATO agenda item, integrating US missile defense with European systems. Greenland plays a heightened diplomatic role in Arctic policy forums. Moderate risk. Greenland's government demands greater autonomy or timetable for independence from Denmark, accelerated by geopolitical pressure. Worst case, a full-blown transatlantic trade conflict. NATO effectiveness declines due to political fragmentation. 5 years out. Most likely, Greenland becomes a strategic Arctic hub for NATO and EU-US collaboration on climate, security, and infrastructure. More icebreaking and Arctic capabilities, ships, satellites, communications tech are built. Moderate risk, persistent trust deficit in alliances leads to parallel security arrangements, EU security compact outside US structures. Worst case, NATO's credibility substantially weakened. Arctic arena becomes a competitive zone for US, China, Russia influence battles, risk of localized military standoffs or near incidents. 10 years out, most likely, integrated multinational Arctic governance structures strengthened, US, EU, Canada, Denmark, Greenland. Greenland strategically important for climate, shipping, and tech, Arctic fiber routes, defense arrays. Moderate risk, Greenland pushes toward full independence from Denmark with widespread global support. Worst case, a new polarized world order around Arctic control emerges. US and EU split on alliance fundamentals. Russia and China expand Arctic footholds. Global trade realigns into rival blocs. Risk of military confrontation over northern sea routes and undersea mineral resources. Bottom line, this isn't merely a strange headline, it's exposing deep fault lines in the post-WWII world order. What starts as a territorial tussle over Greenland could ripple into alliance cohesion, defense alignment, economic cooperation, and geopolitical competition among NATO, Russia, and China. The next few years will be the real shaping period for whether the West holds together or splinters into strategic rivalries with far broader consequences. The 4 actors' baseline motivations. United States. Primary goals: maintain global military primacy, control sea lanes, choke points, space and undersea infrastructure, prevent Eurasian consolidation, Russia plus China, Europe aligning, structural weaknesses, alliance fatigue, domestic political volatility, overextended military footprint, debt-based economic leverage losing marginal power, Trump-era wildcard, transactional alliances, willingness to apply economic coercion to allies, reduced taboo around territorial rhetoric. Europe, EU plus NATO Europe. Primary goals: stability, trade continuity, avoid war on European soil, preserve sovereignty norms, maintain US security umbrella without surrendering autonomy. Structural weaknesses: fragmented decision-making, energy vulnerability, military dependence on US logistics, ISR, and nuclear umbrella. Internal fracture lines: Eastern Europe, hardline versus Russia, Southern Europe, economic survival, Northern Europe, Arctic's tech plus energy. Russia primary goals: break NATO cohesion, secure buffer zones, control Arctic assess and resources, reassert great power legitimacy, structural strengths, willingness to absorb economic pain, escalation tolerance, geographic depth, Arctic militarization head start, weaknesses, demographics, capital access, long-term tech lag. China primary goals: secure resources and trade routes, undermine US alliances system, avoid direct military confrontation until advantage is assured, dominate future tech standards. Structural strengths: industrial scale, strategic patience, state-directed capital, control over and manufacturing. Weaknesses: energy dependency, maritime choke points, internal economic fragility. Strategic awareness: where things actually break. Number 1, the Arctic. Greenland is the keystone. Missile early warning, submarine routes, rare earths, new shipping lanes, space and undersea cables. Control ownership, access and denial matter more. 2, economic warfare layer: tariffs, sanctions, energy pricing, currency weaponization, supply chain denial, insurance and shipping lawfare. This is where war starts before a shot is fired. Next to 3, technology stack: semiconductors, AI compute, satellite constellations, quantum sensing, undersea fiber, rare earth processing. Military superiority increasingly flows from tech ecosystems, not just weapons. Scenario set 1, fractured West, cold multipolar war. Most likely. Phase 1, trigger 0 to 18 months. US pressures Europe economically, tariffs, defense burden leverage. Europe hedges, limited strategic autonomy initiatives. NATO formally intact, functionally strained. Arctic militarization accelerates quietly. Phase 2, alignment shift, 2 to 5 years. Europe builds parallel security plus industrial capacity. US doubles down on Indo-Pacific. Russia exploits gaps. Arctic plus Eastern Europe pressure. China deepens economic integration with Global South. Phase 3, new normal. 5 to 10 years. World splits into interoperable but distrustful blocks. No total war, constant gray zone conflict, proxy conflicts, cyber, sanctions, industrial sabotage. Outcome, no decisive winner, slower global growth, persistent instability, Arctic becomes a militarized DMZ. Scenario set 2, Arctic flashpoint, NATO stress test. Trigger, incident involving US, Danish, or NATO assets in Greenland waters or airspace, Russian submarine or drone confrontation. Infrastructure sabotage, fiber cable, radar, port. Escalation ladder. 1. Diplomatic crisis. 2. Naval posturing. 3. Sanctions escalation. 4. Limited military exclusion zones. China's role, public neutrality, private economic exploitation, Arctic investment surge, tech and logistics support to Russia, plausibly deniable. Europe's dilemma, support US militarily or de-escalate to preserve trade and energy. Worst case, NATO unity cracks publicly, Russia gains strategic legitimacy in Arctic, US credibility erodes. Outcome, contained military incidents, massive political fallout, Arctic permanently militarized. Scenario set 3, economic war, military proxy war. Trigger, full trade war, US-EU or US-China, energy embargo escalation, financial system bifurcation, payment rails, insurance, shipping. Dominoes, global recession, political instability in Europe, Russia applies pressure in Baltics or Balkans, China tests limits in Taiwan Strait without full invasion. Military character, no WWIII, many small wars, high cyber, drone, and proxy intensity. Special forces, deniable actions. Outcome, long-term economic damage, military overstretch, accelerated de-dollarization, permanent geopolitical hostility. Scenario set 4, the bad one, low probability, high impact. Trigger stack, major Arctic incident, Taiwan crisis, European internal collapse, economic plus political, miscalculation by nuclear power. Escalation, regional conventional war, space and cyber assets targeted, global shipping disruption, energy shock, nuclear brinkmanship. This does not look like WWIII. No mass invasions, high-tech, short, brutal engagements. Civilian infrastructure targeted indirectly, power, comms, finance. Outcome, tens of trillions in economic damage, permanent geopolitical realignment, collapse of global trade as we know it. DOE benefits from chaos. Actor benefit from fragmentation. China, Russia, United States, Europe. Europe loses the most from instability. China gains the most from Western incoherence. Russia gains leverage but risks overextension. The US risks losing the system it built. Strategic takeaway, the real danger. The Greenland incident isn't about land. It's about whether the post-1945 alliance model still functions when power is multipolar, economics are weaponized, technology outruns governance, domestic politics override long-term strategy. The real risk isn't war tomorrow. It's sleepwalking into a world where war becomes normal again. If you want, next we can zoom in on one arena, Arctic, Europe, Taiwan, Middle East. Write this as a fictional intelligence briefing, or build a decision tree showing how small choices spiral into disaster. Just say the word